Cold steel lies motionless nearly 5 kilometers beneath the restless surface of the Atlantic, a relic entombed in silence. For decades it has slept, unseen by human eyes, in a place where sunlight has never reached. But when the glow of modern floodlights cuts through the blackness, the stillness is shattered. A state-of-the-art, remotely operated vehicle, a machine engineered to survive where human beings never could, sinks slowly into the abyss. Its thrusters hum softly, its cameras alive, and with each passing meter of descent, anticipation grows in the control room above. The mission is not to touch, not to disturb, but simply to see. And yet, even the act of looking carries weight. Because what waits at the bottom is no ordinary wreck. It is the battleship Bismarck, a name that still stirs awe, sorrow, and unease. The first beams of light sweep across the seabed, scattering sediment like dust through the void. Shapes begin to emerge, twisted plates of steel, skeletal remains of superstructures, and finally the unmistakable silhouette of a bow rising from the mud. To historians, this moment is more than a technical triumph. It is a reunion with a ghost. The Bismarck has rested here since May 1941, when her final battle ended in fire and flood. Over 2,000 men went down with her, entombed in the cold. The ship is not merely metal, it is a grave. That is why the drone does not touch, why its lights are measured, why its movements are as delicate as a feather in water. To enter this place is to cross into sacred ground, and every frame recorded is captured with reverence. But almost immediately, questions rise from the shadows. Did the mighty battleship sink solely from the fury of the Royal Navy, or was she deliberately scuttled by her own crew to deny the enemy a prize? The wreck itself might carry the answer, its scars, its breaks, and its collapsed compartments holding a truth that eyewitness accounts never settled. Survivor testimonies, British after-action reports, and forensic scans have all painted conflicting pictures. Now, with 21st-century technology peering into the abyss, the possibility emerges that the steel itself might finally reveal its secrets. What lies beneath is not just history. It is a riddle carved in armor. The mission is haunted by that riddle. Those monitoring the descent know they are not simply watching a camera feed. They are witnesses to a collision between memory and evidence, between the stories told by survivors and the silent testimony of the wreck itself. The Bismarck is both artifact and tomb, and within that paradox lies the tension of exploration. Every pass of the camera across her hull feels like peeling back a layer of myth, but also like intruding on something never meant to be disturbed. The operators know that when they finally sweep the lights across her scars, they may reopen debates that have lingered for more than 80 years. It is impossible to approach this story without first understanding what the ship meant. When Bismarck sailed, she was more than a weapon. She was a statement, a floating embodiment of German naval ambition. For those who served aboard her, she was home, fortress, and destiny. For the enemies who faced her, she was a predator on the sea, a leviathan built to outgun and outlast. To the families who lost their sons in her steel corridors, she is both pride and tragedy. That is why any expedition that dares to descend is walking a line between science and reverence. One cannot look at the wreck as just metal, because within that metal lies memory, and within that memory lies grief. As the drone settles into position and begins its first deliberate sweep across the bow, its floodlights paint the steel with an eerie glow. What it reveals is not a silent monument, but a battlefield frozen in time. Plates of armor twisted outward, holes punctured in the hull, collapsed turrets lying like broken bones across the deck. The ship carries the scars of her violent death, as if time itself has preserved them for judgment. The drone records everything, its cameras capturing angles no human diver could ever reach. To those above, staring at the monitors, the effect is unnerving. They are looking not only at history's wreckage, but at evidence, a body of steel still speaking of its final moments. And so the central question sharpens. Did British shells and torpedoes alone send Bismarck to the bottom, or did her crew finish the job themselves? Survivor accounts insist scuttling charges were set, valves opened, and orders given to flood compartments as the ship burned. British gunnery officers, however, reported their salvos tearing the ship apart, confident it was their firepower that sealed her fate. The wreck, scarred but intact in strange ways, seems to sit between these two accounts, as though refusing to give one side complete victory. The deeper the cameras roam, the more contradictions appear, and with them, the mystery deepens. What unfolds in this first descent is not the closure the crew might have expected. Instead, the wreck raises new uncertainties. For every plate that seems blown outward by enemy fire, another seems collapsed inward as if by controlled charges. For every breach that looks like torpedo damage, another looks suspiciously like deliberate flooding. It is as though the ship itself resists a simple explanation, its silence more eloquent than words. To stare at the footage is to feel both awe and unease, as though the abyss has chosen to keep its truth shrouded. The drone continues its slow, respectful pass, sweeping across the wreck with the patience of time itself. Those who watch in the control room sit in silence, each aware that they are not just charting steel, but reopening one of the most debated naval mysteries of the Second World War. The Bismarck's death was swift, brutal, and final, but the way she died has never been fully agreed upon. And now, at nearly 5 kilometers beneath the sea, the chance to resolve it rests on images, on steel, and on the voices of the past. This is only the beginning. Far out in the storm-prone waters of the North Atlantic, nearly 470 miles west of France, the Bismarck rests in a silence deeper than memory. She lies upright as though still afloat, though the ocean has claimed her utterly. The seabed here is a place untouched by light, where the pressure is crushing and the cold eternal. It is here, in this alien landscape of mud and blackness, that the wreck holds its vigil. Seen from above, she is both whole and broken, her shape unmistakable, her presence undeniable, but her body scarred by the violence of her end. This is no ordinary wreck. This is a war grave, a steel mausoleum sealed by seawater and time. More than 2,000 sailors went down with her in May of 1941. Their bodies were never recovered, their names etched into history, but their remains forever bound to the ship. That is why, to Germany, the Bismarck is not simply a lost battleship. It is hallowed ground. International conventions recognize it as such. No nation, no expedition, no explorer has the right to disturb it. The rules are not just legal, but moral. This is a place of mourning. Each rivet, each deck plate, each twisted girder is part of a memorial, and any approach must be carried out in silence with reverence, as though attending a funeral beneath the sea. That is why expeditions to the wreck are different from almost any other deep-sea mission. Human divers cannot descend to nearly 4,800 meters, but even if they could, they would not be allowed to step inside. Instead, only machines are sent, specially built to act as eyes without hands. The remotely operated vehicles used in these dives are marvels of engineering, delicate thrusters that allow for movements as soft as a breath, cameras capable of rendering the finest scratches on steel in high definition, sonar arrays mapping every contour without ever touching. They are designed to hover like ghosts, to glide without stirring the mud or brushing the hull. Their purpose is not to claim, but to witness. The symbolism of this cannot be overstated. The choice to send machines rather than men is not just about practicality. It is a deliberate act of respect. A drone can see but not disturb. It can record but not steal. It is an observer, not a trespasser. When its lights sweep across the wreck, it becomes a silent guest at a grave, paying tribute rather than prying. The mission leaders understand this balance deeply. They know they are walking a narrow line. One side is science, history, and truth. The other is desecration. To cross that line would be to violate not only international law, but something older and more profound, the unwritten agreement humanity holds with its dead. Every detail of the operation is planned with the precision of a military maneuver. No contact with the wreck, no attempts to lift artifacts, no intrusion into the hollow corridors where men once fought and died. Even the lights are carefully calibrated, not too bright, not too invasive. The drone's path is mapped like a ritual, ensuring that its presence is felt but never forces itself upon the silence of the grave. In the control room above, the operators know their responsibility. What they record is for history, for descendants, and for memory. But it must always be done with dignity. And yet, even with this restraint, there is unease. The very act of sending down a machine, of piercing the abyss with light and propeller hum, raises questions. Should we even look at all? Should the wreck be left entirely untouched? Its silence unbroken? There are those who argue that every sweep of a camera is an intrusion, that even the gentlest exploration risks turning a grave into a spectacle. Others argue the opposite, that by looking, by remembering, by documenting, we honor the dead by refusing to let their story fade into darkness. These debates haunt every expedition, lingering over every descent. For the team staring at their screens, these questions are not abstract. They know the moment the bow emerges from the silt, they are looking at more than wreckage. They are looking at the final resting place of thousands. They are looking at the very steel that shook with explosions, that burned with fire, that echoed with desperate voices on that last day. The sight is sobering. The ship is massive yet fragile now, its grandeur muted by decades in the deep. Plates gape open like wounds, turrets lie silent like broken teeth, and the deck carries scars where chaos once reigned. It is a battlefield preserved by pressure, a time capsule that still bleeds stories. What the drone reveals is startling. The wreck is both more intact and more ruined than many expected. Her hull sits upright, largely whole, yet gouged and pierced in ways that raise new mysteries. Some sections look as though they were torn apart by relentless bombardment. Others appear collapsed inward, as though deliberately flooded. To the operators, the contradictions are immediate. This is not a wreck that gives up its secrets easily. Instead, it presents questions, riddles, even defiance. The Bismarck seems to resist final judgment, her steel whispering half-truths in the darkness. The footage is haunting. Every pass of the drone's camera captures not just metal, but memory. To watch the images is to feel as though one is trespassing on history itself. And yet there is a pull, an irresistible urge to understand. The Bismarck's story has always been more than just naval history. It is legend, tragedy, and debate all at once. For 80 years, historians, veterans, and families have asked the same question. Was she sunk by the guns of the Royal Navy, or did her crew scuttle her to deny capture? The wreck is the closest thing to an answer, but as the drone glides over her scars, it becomes clear that the answer may not be simple or comforting. In this way, the descent is more than an expedition. It is a confrontation with memory itself. The drone, hovering like a ghost, becomes the medium between the living and the dead, between history and the present. Its cameras are the eyes through which the world peers into a graveyard, and its silence is as eloquent as any survivor's testimony. What it finds in these first passes is not closure but a deepening of mystery. The wreck is not passive. It is active, challenging, as though daring those who look to interpret its scars. And so the debate sharpens. Did British fire alone send Bismarck to the bottom? Or did German scuttling charges play the decisive role? Survivor accounts insist one thing, British gunners another, and the steel itself seems to contradict both. In that tension lies the fascination, the unease, and the reason expeditions return again and again. Each descent is not just a dive into the sea, but into history, into grief, and into the unresolved riddle of one of the most famous ships ever built. The drone glides onward, its cameras recording, its lights piercing the abyss, its presence careful and reverent. Above, the operators lean forward, watching every flicker of shadow across the wreck. They know that with each pass, they are not only documenting history, they are reopening one of the great debates of the 20th century. The Bismarck may be silent, but she is not done speaking. Long before she became a ghost lying in the cold dark, the Bismarck was a vision of power rising above the waters of Germany's shipyards. In the late 1930s, as Europe edged closer to total war, the German Navy sought to reclaim a place it had lost after the First World War. The Versailles Treaty had stripped Germany of its fleet, its ambitions shackled by restrictions. But in secret and then in defiance, engineers and shipwrights began to design something that would break those chains. Out of their plans came a Leviathan, a vessel meant to project strength across the seas and strike fear into the hearts of any who opposed it. Her name would be Bismarck. Laid down in 1936 and launched 3 years later, she was the pride of the Kriegsmarine. At over 820 feet in length and displacing more than 50,000 tons when fully loaded, she was among the largest battleships ever built. Her armor belt, more than a foot thick in places, was so massive that she was said to be nearly impervious to shells. Her engines could drive her across the ocean at over 30 knots, faster than most battleships afloat. But it was her armament that set her apart. 8 15-inch guns, each capable of firing shells that weighed more than a small car and could smash through armor at extraordinary ranges. Around her bristled an array of smaller guns designed to repel aircraft and destroyers alike. To her crew, she was a floating fortress, a home, and a symbol of their nation's might. To Hitler's regime, she was a message. Germany was back, and it intended to rule the seas once more. But power always draws opposition. When the Bismarck sailed, she carried with her the weight of expectation and the certainty that she would be tested. Her mission was not ceremonial. She was built for war. In May 1941, alongside the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, she slipped into the waters of the Denmark Strait. The goal was simple, yet bold. Break into the North Atlantic, attack Britain's vulnerable shipping lanes, and starve the island nation of the supplies it desperately needed. It was a mission that, if successful, could change the course of the war at sea. The British, however, were watching. Their navy, stretched but vigilant, knew that Germany's new giant could not be allowed free rein. As the Bismarck and Prince Eugen entered the icy waters of the Denmark Strait, they were met by 2 of Britain's most powerful warships, HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and HMS Prince of Wales, a brand-new battleship still fresh from the yards. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic naval duels of the Second World War. In the gray dawn of May 24th, the clash began. British guns opened fire first, their massive shells arcing across the sea toward their prey. The crews aboard Hood and Prince of Wales braced themselves, confident in their ship's strength. But the Bismarck's gunners were skilled, her fire control systems precise, and within minutes she found her mark. A shell struck Hood in the most vulnerable of places, her aft magazine. What followed was catastrophe. A single moment of violence unleashed a detonation so immense that it ripped Britain's most beloved battlecruiser apart. In a flash of fire and smoke, the Hood was gone. More than 1,400 men perished with her. Only 3 survivors were pulled from the freezing waters. For Germany, it was a moment of triumph. For Britain, it was a wound so deep that the nation cried out for vengeance. The loss of Hood was not just a military disaster. It was personal, a strike at national pride. From the Admiralty to the smallest fishing village, the message was clear. The Bismarck must be destroyed, no matter the cost. The chase was on. The Bismarck, though victorious, had not escaped unscathed. During the battle, she had taken damage, and more importantly, she was leaking fuel. This forced her to break off her mission and attempt a retreat south toward the safety of occupied France. But the Royal Navy was relentless. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and even aircraft carriers were thrown into the hunt. From every direction, the noose tightened. The Atlantic was vast, but for the Bismarck, it was suddenly not vast enough. The turning point came on May 26th. The weather was foul. The sea restless, yet from the carrier HMS Ark Royal, a squadron of outdated swordfish biplanes took to the air. Clumsy, slow, and seemingly obsolete, they should have stood no chance against one of the most modern warships afloat. But fate has a sense of irony. Through clouds and spray, the swordfish attacked. Torpedoes splashed into the sea and streaked toward their target. Most missed or caused only minor damage, but one struck true. It jammed Bismarck's rudder, locking her into a slow, helpless circle. The great predator was crippled, unable to maneuver, unable to escape. For the crew aboard Bismarck, the blow was devastating. They had weathered battleships and cruisers, but now they were trapped, wounded, and surrounded. The ocean itself had turned against them. Still, they prepared to fight. The engineers kept the engines running, the gunners readied their shells, and the officers steeled themselves for the inevitable. The Royal Navy was closing in, and the final act of Bismarck's story was about to begin. That night, the ship groaned under the weight of her damage, circling slowly in the dark waves. Men prayed, wrote letters they would never send, and prepared for dawn. Above, destroyers shadowed her, firing sporadically, keeping the pressure constant. The next morning, the full fury of Britain's fleet would descend, and the ship that had once represented Germany's naval pride would face its end. But how that end came, by enemy shells or by the hands of her own crew, remains one of the great mysteries. The wreck itself, scarred and silent in the deep, holds the final evidence. Dawn broke on May 27, 1941, cold and gray, as if the sea itself mourned what was about to unfold. On the horizon came the silhouettes of Britain's warships, dark against the lightening sky, their guns already trained on the crippled Leviathan. The battleships, HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, advanced, flanked by cruisers and destroyers, each vessel eager to deliver the blow Britain had demanded since Hood's destruction. For the men aboard Bismarck, there was no more running, no more evasion. Their rudder still jammed, they could only circle slowly, waiting for the storm of steel to begin. At 8:47 a.m., the horizon lit up with fire. Shells as tall as a man screamed across the water, smashing into Bismarck's superstructure with thunderous force. Her own guns roared in reply, belching fire and smoke, but her ability to aim was compromised. The ship shuddered under each impact, her armor holding for a time, but gradually giving way under the relentless barrage. King George V and Rodney pounded her from close range, tearing away turrets, shredding her decks, and ripping holes in her hull. Soon her proud lines were disfigured, her once mighty batteries silenced one by one. Below deck, chaos reigned. Fires spread unchecked. Bulkheads crumpled. Men fought not just the enemy, but smoke, heat, and flooding. Yet still the crew stayed at their posts, trying desperately to keep their ship alive. Even as their world collapsed around them, they loaded shells, worked engines, and manned damage control teams. Accounts from survivors later spoke of astonishing courage. Men who refused to abandon their duties even when all hope was gone. The Bismarck, though doomed, refused to yield easily. By mid-morning, the ship was a wreck, her guns destroyed, her deck a slaughterhouse of twisted steel. Rodney had closed to point-blank range, pouring shell after shell into the German battleship, a brutal, almost personal assault. Torpedoes from the cruisers Dorsetshire and Norfolk struck home, adding to the devastation. Yet remarkably, Bismarck did not sink immediately. Her armored citadel kept her afloat, her bulk refusing to surrender to the sea. For the British gunners, it was almost uncanny. The great ship absorbing punishment beyond imagination, still standing defiant in her ruin. It was then, as the slaughter dragged on, that questions of agency arose. Did the British truly sink Bismarck, or did her crew take fate into their own hands? Survivors would later insist that scuttling charges were set, that orders came from the captain and engineering officers to flood compartments and prevent the ship from falling intact into enemy hands. The Royal Navy, meanwhile, claimed the credit as theirs, pointing to the ferocious bombardment and torpedoes that had reduced her to a flaming hulk. The truth, as so often in war, may lie somewhere in between. What is certain is that at 10:40 a.m., the mighty battleship rolled to her side, her stern rising as her bow plunged beneath the waves. In minutes, she was gone, swallowed by the Atlantic, leaving only wreckage and oil upon the surface. More than 2,000 men went down with her. Out of a crew of over 2,200, only 114 survived, plucked from the freezing water by British destroyers. For hours afterward, cries echoed across the waves, desperate, human reminders of the cost of glory. Some sailors clung to wreckage, others simply drifted, their strength ebbing as the cold claimed them. Then silence. The Atlantic closed over the scene, as if eager to hide the violence it had just witnessed. For Britain, the sinking of Bismarck was both triumph and requiem. Justice had been served for the loss of Hood, and a threat to the lifelines of the island nation had been removed. But even among the victors there was little celebration. Those who witnessed the final battle spoke less of glory and more of pity, for the young men trapped aboard, for the senselessness of a Leviathan's destruction in the prime of her power. War, after all, devours not only ships, but the men who sail them. For Germany, the loss was devastating. Bismarck had been their great symbol, their hope of challenging British mastery of the seas. In a single week, that hope had been dashed, and their fleet was left crippled, cautious, and unable to ever again threaten the Atlantic in the same way. The sinking of Bismarck marked not only the end of a ship, but the end of an era, the last great clash of battleships in the Atlantic, soon to be replaced by the dominance of carriers and aircraft. Decades later, the story of Bismarck still captivates. In 1989, the ocean finally gave up her resting place when Dr. Robert Ballard, fresh from his discovery of Titanic, located the wreck. There, nearly 3 miles below the surface, lay the remains of the Leviathan. Her hull rests upright, her bow buried deep in the seabed, her turrets scattered like broken teeth. The scars of battle are etched into her steel, but her silhouette remains unmistakable, a ghost of war preserved in eternal darkness. Ballard and later expeditions confirmed what many had long suspected. Bismarck had not simply been blasted apart. Her hull showed signs of scuttling, of deliberate flooding from within, even as British shells and torpedoes tore at her. In death, as in life, she remained both victim and agent of her own fate. Her story forever caught between enemy fire and the hands of her own crew. Today, as we look back, the name Bismarck carries with it both awe and sorrow. She was a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ambition, and yet also a symbol of how ambition, when bound to destructive ends, leads only to ruin. Her story is not simply one of naval power, but of fragility, how even the strongest steel cannot outlast the weight of history. Far below, where no light reaches, the Bismarck rests still. Around her lie the unanswered questions, the whispered prayers of the men who went down with her, and the silence of the deep. She is both a tomb and a time capsule, her story etched into the very fabric of the ocean. And perhaps that is fitting, for the Bismarck was never just a ship. She was a legend, and legends are never truly gone. They linger, like ghosts, reminding us of the thin line between power and tragedy, between triumph and loss, between the pride of nations and the price paid by those who serve them.